Tracking the tropics will begin momentarily. Tracking the tropics will begin momentarily. Live from our hurricane headquarters with real-time analysis from some of the nation's top meteorologists, this is Tracking the Tropics.
Are we in for a November surprise? That is the question as activity returns to the tropics with 3 disturbances that we're keeping a close eye on for development. We're live with the latest models in your hurricane headquarters. Also, to answer your questions live out of the Facebook Live comment section on Tracking the Tropics, powered by Handyman Roofing. Hello there to you folks. Happy Wednesday, wherever you're joining us from. JB here with you in your hurricane headquarters alongside our trio of meteorologists. WFLA Chief Meteorologist Jeff Biradelli, WFLA Meteorologist Rebecca Barry, and joining us from Mobile, friends of the program will know, of course, Ed Bloodsworth, formerly of WFLA, current WKRG Chief Meteorologist there in the top right-hand portion of your screen. Joining us from the Alabama coast, got some things to talk about as we get through our last edition of Tracking the Tropics in October, as November, of course, right around the corner. And November is a month where we could see tropical activity. And for the very latest on whether or not we are in for a November surprise, let's send it over to the wall for Chief Meteorologist Jeff Biradelli. Jeff?
All right. Yes. And JB, we need to switch sources over to one.
I'll make sure we get that done.
Okay, that's fine. So are we going to see a surprise? Well, it wouldn't be a surprise to us, that's for sure, because we would definitely let you know. But, you know, we are going to be seeing the possibility of a couple of tropical storms that could form. And if that were to happen, it would get us to normal in terms of the count for the season, around normal territory, but not for the amount of energy. So we have something called accumulated cyclone energy. That's still about well below normal, at least 25% below normal. So let's talk about what's happening right now. And you can see this kind of strung out front, if you will. And there's a couple of places where we could see development. One there, one further to the south, and one further to the south. Actually, it's fairly typical for systems to develop on the very tail end of these fronts. That's the one that we're most concerned about, the one that we're watching most closely. But as we look across the Atlantic, development becomes a lot less likely out here in the intertropical convergence zone as we head into later in the season. It becomes a lot more likely, a little closer to home. So this system does not look like it's actually going to develop here. But the reason why we're showing it to you is it looks like it's probably going to back its way towards Maine or maybe towards Prince Edward Island, Halifax. Likely not to be a tropical system, but it will deliver some heavy rain up there. So let's talk about the ones that are more likely to form here. This area has been upgraded to a 50% chance of development. This is now to the east of the Turks and Caicos Islands, to the north of San Juan, as you can see. But this is never going to be an issue for us. This is going to be moving north along that boundary, if you will. And then further to the south, a couple things happening here. We have a weak tropical wave interacting with some convection right along the coast right here and some upper level divergence. And so that all comes together over the next couple of days for a 40% chance of development. But the models are getting a little bit more aggressive on developing this. Most of the models agree that something will probably come of this as it continues to move towards the west. And for the first time, the European model is starting to show potential for development, whereas for the past several days, it's been the American GFS model that's shown the potential for development. And the American model's been all over the place. And if you've been watching social media, you know it was developing a monster storm. But as meteorologists, we know not to trust the models past a certain date and time. And there's a certain thing about the American model way out in the long range. It often will spin up tropical cyclones. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. But more than anything, you just can't believe exactly how strong that it's predicting it's going to be so far out and exactly where it's going to go. But now we're getting a little closer, so we want to show you the comparison between the American model in green and the European model in red. You can see it right there. They're both developing a system somewhere in the central part of the Caribbean and then moving west as we head into next week. So it's possible that we could see a landfalling tropical system of some sort. It could even potentially be a hurricane as we head into next week somewhere in Central America. And there are hints that perhaps some of that energy could eventually try to make its way a little bit further to the north. But it's certainly nothing that we want to worry about right now, or we need to worry about, and it's very early in the game. Of course, we'll keep you updated. This is where we see likely tropical development. As I told you, it's less likely out here now and a little bit more likely closer to home. All right, I'm going to walk back to the desk. We're going to talk to Ed. We're going to talk to Rebecca and JB.
All right, Jeff, thank you very much for the very latest on the tropics. And of course, back here with you, everybody, in your hurricane headquarters, joined by WKRG Chief Meteorologist Ed Bloodsworth and WFLA Meteorologist Rebecca Barry there in the bottom right-hand portion of your screen. Really quickly, Ed, I'm going to get to our comments in just a moment. We've got a couple in the queue right now, but your take, of course, on where we are towards the end of October, entering early November here in hurricane season.
Yeah, I know. As we can start heading towards, the last about 5-6 weeks of the season, as we said, normally we tend to see activity, wind down historically. But again, it's not impossible to get tropical activity in November. I go back to 2020 when there was a Category 4 Hurricane Eta in the Caribbean, and a lot of those systems tend to, but historically. Mainly impacted areas in the Caribbean or Central America. Also, we tend to get more subtropical activity forming across the Atlantic basin, sort of these hybrid systems. So as Jeff was kind of mentioning, along these large elongated surface troughs, you can get things to spin up. And that's also what we tend to watch in October as well, when we see these fronts start making their way into the Gulf of Mexico, where you have still some historically warmer waters as well. So again, not unusual to see what we're seeing out there now, but it's just something for us to keep our eyes on. We never really entirely rest until we hit that end of the season right around November 30th.
Of course, November 30th being the end of hurricane season. You see the hashtags all around your screen, everybody. You can use any of those hashtags with your Facebook Live comment, and we'll animate your comments on screen here in just a moment. I want to bring in Rebecca Barry here. Rebecca, doing a lot of great work talking about this activity in particular on TikTok. You might recognize Rebecca from some of the stuff that she's been doing on TikTok over here. Rebecca, can you kind of sum up where we are as we enter the month of November, similar to what you've been talking about on TikTok?
Well, we are going to see a little bit of activity increase. We're seeing that out there right now. So we most likely are going to hit average numbers. So the average number of named storms at this point is 12. For the end of the season, it's 14. We're sitting at 11 right now. And it does look like we'll probably get closer to that 12 to 14 range before the end of the season. One of the things I was planning on talking about on TikTok tonight is how similar this is to the 2013 season. We talked about it earlier, how the sea surface temperature pattern was very close to that. It was also a very quiet season. We only had 2 hurricanes that season, but it was very late. We actually saw the last subtropical system fading in December. And so we may see kind of a November surprise. We may see a little bit more tropical energy out there later in the season than we typically expect if it does follow the same pattern that 2013 season did.
I know that also, too, as we talk about what's currently going on in the tropics, there's also, of course, a significant anniversary that we are talking about as well, Jeff.
Yes.
It's worth mentioning, even though it was a long time ago, correct?
But it's really important that we talk about it because it has all the markings of the kind of storm that would affect Tampa Bay potentially again at some point. So this is the 1921 Great Tampa Hurricane, also the Tarpon Springs Hurricane, and we'll put this in motion for you, and you'll be able to see kind of where it originated, also in the Southern Caribbean, which again is typical. It was at one point a Cat 4, weakened to a Cat 3 as it made its way onshore around Tarpon Springs. And it was quite a destructive storm. Let me go back one more time and we'll go forward again. It was a Cat 3. It had winds right around 120 miles an hour at 11 feet of storm surge. And at least people have said, and I know we talked about this in our special last year, that there were waves up and over Ybor City and up to even the balconies in Ybor City. That's how much storm surge there was. And considering it hit Tarpon Springs, you might think, well, Ybor City's far from Tarpon Springs. But that is the breadth of the impact of these storms. And there were a couple of photos, too, I can bring up. There's one photo from the storm. And I don't think, JB, did they have iPhones back then?
No, I'm gonna take a wild guess.
iPhone 4.
But you know what?
It was iPhone 4, right? It does feel like it probably was that long ago.
But you know what? This photo quality for 1921 it's not that bad.
It's actually an Android.
It's an Android. An Android back in my goodness. That track gives me goosebumps because, of course, that was something that we could have had with Hurricane Ian, the angle in which the storm came in. And, of course, Ed, we look back at these photos. You know the area well, being a former meteorologist here in Tampa Bay. This is a storm that people, look, it's one for the history books, but it's something that people are well aware of as far as previous storms to hit the Tampa Bay area.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Tampa. Went to high school down the river there from Channel 8 and at Blake High School in Tampa. So I'm very familiar with this storm. And you mentioned just it's incredible that part of the Florida coast has not experienced a major hurricane, as you said, now in 101 years. But although, and as Jeff alluded to, although it has not happened on a regular basis to get tropical system to take that exact track, it just shows you how susceptible that part of Florida is to significant storm surge and how far inland, as you mentioned, according to the historical record of that storm, even if you have a 10 to 12 foot surge, how far inland that can go into Ybor City. And as you guys know, I mean, Ybor is not, I would say, it's within this closeness of the water and the channels there, but it would still be considered by as many a little bit farther inland than some of the other notable areas. So that just shows you the kind of power and kind of havoc these storms can wreak if they come in at the right angle there towards Tampa Bay.
Really quickly before we move on to our meteorologist Q&A, this is before the Saffir-Simpson scale, correct? So do we have any idea what category of hurricane this would have been registered as?
Well, they think it was a 3. They think it was a 3, and if you trust the records that far back, it's about 100 years ago. They say the winds were probably around 120 miles an hour.
Yeah, eerie, but also you see these photos too, and my goodness, it provides tremendous clarity. Let's get to the meteorologist Q&A, and if we can go back to live satellite, you guys. I want to bring up again, if you use any of the hashtags that we have, what we can do is we can animate your comments on screen. For those of you who've been with us here before in the program, you know how it works. Use a hashtag, ask a question, and Lindsay was the first one to get in this question, and it says hashtag, hey Jeff, probably a dumb question, but is it possible for these systems to combine?
Not a dumb question. People ask that question all the time. And the answer is not really. No, 2 tropical systems would not combine because one of them would kill the other one. There's so much rising air inside of these storms that you have a tremendous amount of substance or sinking air on the outskirts of these storms. So when they encounter each other, whichever one has the stronger sinking air usually just kind of crushes the other one. But you can get systems to merge if they're not the same entity. So you can get a tropical system to merge with a front or a trough of low pressure or another storm. And that's what happened with Superstorm Sandy, of course, and it became such a powerful storm. If you remember with Sandy, first, of course, it caused a tremendous amount of storm surge around New York City. And then it produced like 2 feet of snow in the mountains of West Virginia, I think, and Western Virginia. That was an incredibly interesting meteorological storm because it wasn't just purely tropical. And it also caused all kinds of insurance havoc because it was a hurricane right up until it got to the coast. And then the National Hurricane Center said, okay, it's still the same strength, but it's no longer a hurricane. It's now an extratropical cyclone. And so anybody trying to claim that they got hit by a tropical system, they had trouble with their insurance companies because it was no longer a tropical system, which was just really weird. So hopefully we've solved that bureaucracy for the future.
Brody on the WFLA Facebook page. Brody, a frequent watcher of WFLA's Tracking the Tropics. Hashtag Hey Jeff. But I'm coming your way, Ed, with this one. Do you think the Gulf Coast is closed with the amounts of cold fronts that have come through? I'm sure you would like for the Gulf Coast to be closed, but...
Yeah, I think everyone along the Gulf Coast here have already put up their proverbial close signs. We're closed for business for the season. But you know, I think a lot of folks have probably got that mindset based off of actually what we saw last week, and of course what you guys saw last week here. I mean, we had temperatures of some areas in our viewing area up here in the Gulf Coast experienced their first freeze last week. We had temperatures in the lower 30s and even some upper 20s, and so a lot of folks look at that and think, man, maybe we've completely shut things down. And of course, normally we get these troughs to dive much farther south, and would never say that we're entirely closed until we get towards the end of the season. But again, it tends to trend a little bit better for the Gulf of Mexico once you start, especially getting out of October and then into November. Again, as you mentioned, as these troughs start driving these cold fronts farther and farther south, and they tend to pick up or deflect these systems off to the east. So again, not to say it's not out of the question this time of the this season, but you know, hopefully we tend to keep these deeper troughs keep them going across the Gulf over the next couple of weeks.
I'm thinking about all the folks out there that go above and beyond with the crazy Halloween decorations outside their homes. You ever see those homes you drive by and you're just like, my goodness, you're blown away by how much they put into it. Those folks, I'm speaking to them specifically here, they're in the clear, right, Rebecca?
Oh,
I mean, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, nothing to worry about
No.
as far as a tropical storm or a hurricane between now and Halloween.
No.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
How about we're coming your
Gives me an
way?
idea. Why don't me and my family dress as like weather systems, like different hurricanes or something like that?
This is obvious.
See, I don't know why I didn't think of that.
Renee
not
Ross
too late.
on the
it
WFLA
happen,
Facebook
Jeff.
page. Hashtag Hey Jeff. Why do the storms seem like they're getting stronger? And I don't know if Renee is asking this like long term over decades or short term over months, but I'll bring up you and Rebecca for this question.
Yeah. So, you know, over the course of decades, these storms seem to be getting a little stronger. There is evidence that they are getting stronger. There's not a tremendous amount of evidence yet, but it seems as though, let's put it this way. Storms are more likely to go from run-of-the-mill hurricanes to major hurricanes than they were. In the Atlantic Ocean, it's about twice as likely than it was back in the 1970s and 1980s. So we've seen an increase in the ability for storms to jump from Cat 1s, Cat 2s into the major, Category 3s and 4s. Why is that? Well, water temperatures are much warmer. And, you know, water temperatures are warm all across the Atlantic this year. So it's not just water temperatures, right? We only saw, 11 storms this year. And our research shows that actually the number of storms should be going down with climate change. So I'll let Rebecca jump in.
We talked about the potential for climate change and potentially rising temperatures to create more shear across the Atlantic. And that's certainly something that we saw in this season was a high level of shear. And during the middle of the season when things normally start getting cranked up, there was just so much shear out there, nothing could form. And so I do think that's interesting that we may see fewer storms form, but those that do form would be stronger. And so that's just kind of a different thought process than maybe we had with earlier research.
Ed, really quickly before we move on to the next one, do you have anything to add on this particular topic about strongs potentially getting stronger or stronger?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's something that we've certainly noticed here, even just in the last couple of years. I mean, how many storms now that we noticed that went through these rapid intensification cycles? I mean, you can name probably five or maybe even 10 right off the bat just in the last 5 years or so. We go back to 2017 when, Harvey, Maria, and then and then of course Irma out in the Atlantic. More recently, you look at Ida, Laura, and I mean all of these storms that went through this. So it's certainly something we're seeing more and more often. And it's warmer temperatures, more heat, more heat to draw, and these tropical systems are engines, the way for the globe to release excess heat. So you have more heat on there, you're going to create stronger storms. So it's something that we've been watching for decades here, and we're seeing it more and more often.
I'm looking here.
I want to ask Rebecca something real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
Rebecca knows that I don't remember stuff very well. What was the number? So for every degree Celsius, I think it was, or I can't remember if it was Fahrenheit or Celsius now, but remember for every degree, I did a climate segment about 2 weeks ago, but I always forget the exact numbers. It was something like for every degree increase in water temperature, it was like a potential increase in winds of 20 miles an hour? Is that
I was thinking 15, so 15 to 20 sounds
yes.
right. Yeah, it was in that range that it was significant.
Do you remember it was Fahrenheit or Celsius?
Nope.
Sorry, folks. But the truth is there is a very specific number. There's research done on this, and the potential increase in winds, if everything else is perfect, is something like 15 miles an hour per 1 degree increase in water temperature. And I have to look up for sure.
It's Fahrenheit.
Is it Fahrenheit? Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's Fahrenheit.
I think actually the researcher who came up with that is up at Florida State, but I could be wrong about that.
We got one more question in the queue before we have a couple of comments pertaining to the 1921 hurricane, which I think is very fascinating. But let's get to Daniel's comment first. Daniel Isbell on WFLA's Facebook page. #KJB. Would this be considered to be a subtropical storm if it becomes one? I'm not sure which of the trio of systems that we're kind of monitoring here, which one they're referring to, but anybody want to hop in and take Daniel's question?
Sure, absolutely. So we may see the more northern storms become a subtropical storm, especially if we were to see that one that's approaching Maine eventually. If that were to form, it would certainly be subtropical. Even the one that's south of Bermuda right now, if it makes it far enough north, it could be a subtropical system as opposed to a tropical system.
Let's get to this comment from Deborah Wilson talking, but maybe we can rack back up those pictures from the 1921 hurricane, if we can really quickly. Here it is. It's just loaded up on our screen. Deborah Wilson on WFLA. I don't know why it says you're temporary blocked. That is not accurate. I don't know why it's saying that. That's not part of the comment.
Am I blocked? Or are you blocked?
I don't know. Someone's blocked.
blocked?
Okay, there it is. It's gone.
Okay.
Hey Jeff, how fast was the 1920s Tampa storm moving? This is a very observant sort of question because speed relates to how much devastation a storm
and
can.
I honestly do not remember. I mean, I was really young back then. No, Ed, do you know the answer to that question? I don't know. I don't recall what it was.
Yeah, I don't recall the forward speed as well, but again, even like you mentioned, though, forward speed of these storms will impact a lot of aspects in terms of surge and everything else here. So
it looked like it was moving fast, but then again, that straight line is probably an approximation because because it was so long ago. So who knows if it slowed and it did a little loop to loop that the historical record wouldn't be able to show that because we didn't have satellites back then.
But that makes me ask this question: the colors that we're seeing here on this track are indicating what?
The colors are indicating the strength of the storm. So the purple is a 4, and the red is a 3, and then the yellow is either a 2 or a 1. And the reason, so we would know that due to observation. So there probably were some ships out there in the Gulf. But again, a lot of the historical record before satellites is an estimate. It is an estimate. We're not 100% sure that those numbers are exactly right. That's why it's really hard to get a handle on trends in number and strength of hurricanes because we don't have a great historical record any longer than around 50 years long.
Let's get to a couple more questions that we have about the 1921 Great Tampa Hurricane. Again, talking about that anniversary here, 101 years ago. Mary Lee, #Hey Jeff, truth or fiction, was John's Pass formed with that 1921 hurricane?
So do you think that this is one of those, like, is this a test? True or false test? So
right, are they quizzing us?
It's both true and false. I'll tell you why. It's false. It's not John's Pass. It's Hurricane Pass in between Caladesi and Honeymoon Island. That was formed during the 1921 storm. I don't know exactly how John's Pass was affected by that storm.
Ed, we call on you, Ed.
Johns Pass was created by a major hurricane, but it was created by a hurricane in 1848. A major hurricane.
Yeah, I have no recollection of that at all.
So
The iPhone 1.
I was a mere child.
iPhone
back then.
What's the promo, the commercial that runs in Alabama? Is it Ed Knows?
I believe it's Ed Says.
Oh, Ed Says. Ed Says.
Yeah. So,
Ed has spoken. Everybody. What again? The year was once again?
Yeah.
I believe it was 1848. You
Yep,
can go
that's
back.
correct.
It was somewhere in the mid 1840s.
I think you're right. Yeah,
Back
that's
during the
right.
BlackBerry era. So
Right. So those were the two strongest storms that we've seen in the past like 200 years here in the Tampa Bay area.
Very interesting. Now we have this. This is not a question, but it's a comment from Dell. #HeyJB. They tied my grandmother and other children in Pinellas to trees for that 1921 storm.
Was it
I've
for the
never
storm?
heard of this, but I'm bringing it up. Not saying that it didn't happen, Dell, but was that a tactic in 1921 to tie people to trees in the event that a big storm was to blow through?
How well behaved were they? That's the question.
Yeah.
Might not be storm related.
yeah.
Anybody-
Obviously, we would never recommend that nowadays, since we
Yes,
know
please.
very well of how to protect ourselves from these incoming tropical systems.
Tying yourself to trees, not one of them.
Not to mention the trees are not safe structures. We see trees get uprooted all the time by hurricanes. So not look, it was 1921 and forecasting at that time, how primitive was it? It was non-existent.
Almost non-existent. Yeah. There was a forecaster in Galveston, that great Galveston hurricane. Was it 1911 or 10?
Yeah.
10? And there were forecasters back then, but it would have been very difficult. They would have had maybe ship report or maybe a report from Mexico or Cuba. I mean, it was very primitive.
Let's get to this. This is a last call for any questions or comments, but I'm going to try to get Jelani Norman's question on screen. It's for Rebecca, but we'll try to all chime in here. Jelani Norman wants to know, #Hey Rebecca, what was the latest in the year a hurricane has hit? And I think that we have talked about this on a previous edition of Tracking the Tropics, talking about storms that do have the potential. December tropical storms are not impossible. It's still possible in the month of December, but do we have an answer here for Jelani's question?
I do not have an exact date. I am not Ed Bloodsworth when it comes to trivia, but we have seen tropical systems in as late as December, which is, of course, postseason. And I think I'm going to be dangerous on this one, but I think we've seen one in early January.
I think we've seen them in almost every month, and I don't know the answer to this question. I'm really glad you asked Rebecca and not me. but there definitely been hurricane hits in November, although I believe the strongest hurricane to hit so late in the season was the 1921 Tampa hurricane. That was up until 2011. Do you know, Ed, after 2011, if there's been a major hurricane to hit the U.S. After October 25th?
I don't believe so, and yeah, I mean you can check that, but I think I am not entirely sure of that, but I doubt. I mean, you're not going to see likely. I would say it's unlikely that has occurred. But you mentioned the major hurricanes, but major hurricanes making landfall in November in other parts of the along the Atlantic Basin is very common. Like 2020 Hurricane Ada, that was the Cat 4 that went into Central America. So you can still get major hurricanes
Iota.
landfall. And Iota, exactly.
Which was amazing. I'm still amazed by those two storms, Ed, because they hit within 15 miles of each other. I think it was 3 weeks apart from each other. Literally 15 miles away from each other in Nicaragua and Honduras. And it displaced 500,000 people. Mm-hmm. And the outcome of that is that we ended up with a lot of people who were trying to migrate northward into Mexico and eventually to the United States because they had nowhere to live. And it decimated, I think, something like 80% of the agriculture industry in parts of Honduras. So people had it wasn't so much that they didn't have places to live. They didn't have anything for subsistence. They couldn't support their families. I did a story on it many years ago, so I know exactly what happened there. It was very, 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 very sad what those two storms did.
I'm surrounded by all these screens, right? And one of the reasons I'm surrounded by all these screens is because I can actually look up some information. Would you believe there's a Wikipedia page for off-season hurricanes, specifically off-season hurricanes? So that led me to Hurricane Alex in 2016. I'll read it here. Again, this is
I remember that.
sourcing Wikipedia. Yes. First Atlantic hurricane to occur in January, the month of January. I think Rebecca was on this. since Hurricane Alice back in 1954, 1955. That storm, Hurricane Alice, extending from December 31st out into January of 1955. So Alex, a very rare January system, and it didn't have much consequence as far as it was really passed by Bermuda, but it had no effect here on us in the United States. So there you go. A little bit of looking up some knowledge here for our Tracking the Tropics audience, wherever they are watching from. Before we end out this episode, the final word goes to our featured meteorologist today, WKRG's Chief Meteorologist, Ed Bloodsworth. Ed, what are you going to be watching for in the weeks ahead as we get a little bit closer to the end of hurricane season here?
Well, in the next couple of weeks, we'll see if we tick any more names off of this list. If we get either some tropical or subtropical development in the Caribbean or out into the around the Atlantic with this big elongated trough. But bottom line to folks and frequent viewers here on Tracking the Tropics is that, again, we still have five to 6 weeks left in the season. And as we've just been reiterating, our conversation in the last couple of minutes has talked about storms that can form in November and outside of the season. So, it's U.S. landfalls are looking less and less likely once you get farther in the season, but always remember the season continues through the end of November. So always make sure you're still staying on top of your tropical weather plans, just in case something decides to or tries to spin up out there, and we'll certainly keep our eyes on it.
Very likely the very last October episode of Season 4 of Tracking the Tropics. Would like to thank our featured meteorologist, Ed Bloodsworth, joining us from Mobile, Alabama, and, of course, our two resident meteorologists here, WFLA, Jeff Biradelli and Rebecca Barry, joining us here in your hurricane headquarters. From our entire Tracking the Tropics team, a very happy Halloween to everybody out there, and we will likely see you for our next episode. Tracking the Tropics streams Wednesdays, 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central, or additional episodes for when storms form on whatever platform that you're watching on right now. We're live, of course, across WFLA's platforms, but also our sister stations across the Gulf Coast, including WKRG and Mobile. So for the very latest, you can go to trackingthetropics.tv for more Tracking the Tropics content. Thanks so much, folks, and we'll see you next time here on Tracking the Tropics.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics. Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics. Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics. Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics. Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics. Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics. Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics. Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics. Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.